I was staring at the words scrawled across my bathroom mirror in red lipstick when I realized my own family was trying to kill me. Stop or die. The letters were jagged, angry, written by someone who had torn through my apartment like a hurricane. Every drawer was overturned, every photo frame smashed, my clothes shredded and scattered across the floor like confetti at a funeral. This wasn't a robbery. Nothing valuable was taken. This was a message, and I knew exactly who sent it. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone to call the police, but then I stopped. What would I tell them that my father, Marcus Vance, one of Portland's most respected real estate moguls, had hired someone to break into my apartment, that my own mother had spent weeks telling everyone I was mentally unstable, that my brother had physically assaulted me in a bank parking lot? They would think I was the crazy one, just like my family wanted them to believe. If you are enjoying this story of how I fought back against the people who were supposed to love me, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of survival and justice. Drop a comment below telling me what you would have done in my situation. Your support means everything. But let me take you back to where this nightmare really began, 6 months before that terrifying message appeared on my mirror. It started on a gray October morning when I got the call that my grandfather, Jonathan Vance, had passed away in his sleep. I was the only one who cried at his funeral. My father, Marcus, stood stone-faced at the front of the chapel, checking his phone every few minutes. My mother, Isabel, dabbed at perfectly dry eyes with a handkerchief, more concerned with how she looked to Portland's elite than with the man lying in the casket. My older brother, Leo, didn't even bother to hide his boredom, yawning through the entire service. I was the black sheep of the Vance family, and I had always known it. While Leo had been groomed since birth to take over the family business, I had been tolerated at best, ignored at worst. I didn't have the right pedigree, according to my mother, who never let me forget that my father had married her when I was already 2 years old, the product of his brief relationship with a woman she called Common. I had spent my entire childhood trying to earn their approval, making myself small and quiet, excelling at school, staying out of their way. The one person who had ever made me feel like I belonged was my grandfather, Jonathan. He was the one who had built the Vance real estate empire from nothing, starting with a single apartment building in the 1950s and turning it into a portfolio worth hundreds of millions. But more than that, he was kind. He remembered my birthday. He asked about my day. He told me I was smart and capable, and he actually meant it. When he got sick 2 years ago, I was the one who visited him every week at the assisted living facility. Even though it was a 2-hour drive from my tiny apartment in Eugene, I would sit with him for hours, listening to his stories about the early days, about building something with his own hands, about treating people fairly. My father visited maybe twice. Leo never came at all. The day after the funeral, the family gathered at my father's lawyer's office for the reading of the will. I almost didn't go. I knew I wouldn't inherit anything significant. That's just how it was in the Vance family. But something in me wanted to be there one last time, to honor the man who had been the only source of light in my otherwise dark childhood. The lawyer, a slick man in his 40s, named Richard Sterling, opened a manila folder and began to read. Everything was left to Marcus just as expected. The properties, the investments, the company shares, all of it. My name wasn't mentioned once. I sat there in that leather chair, my hands folded in my lap, telling myself I shouldn't have expected anything different. I was nodding already, planning my exit when I heard Richard say something that made me freeze. And to my granddaughter Ilara, I leave my personal effects and the sum of $50,000 for her continued education and independence. $50,000. It wasn't much compared to the empire Marcus had just inherited, but to me, working as a financial analyst making $45,000 a year, it was life-changing. More than that, it was acknowledgement. My grandfather had thought of me. He had wanted me to have something. I looked up and caught my father's eye. His expression was unreadable, but something cold flickered there for just a moment before he smiled that practiced smile he used with clients. "Congratulations, Ilara," he said flatly. My mother said nothing, but I could feel her disapproval radiating across the room. Leo snorted. Guess the old man went soft at the end. I left that office feeling lighter than I had in years. $50,000 meant I could finally pay off my student loans. Maybe even save for a down payment on a real apartment instead of the cramped studio I had been renting. For the first time in my life, I had something that was mine, something my family couldn't take away. Except they were already planning to take it away. 2 weeks later, I received a call from Richard Sterling's office. There had been an error, his secretary explained in a bored voice. A revised will had been found, dated more recently than the one that had been read. In this version, my grandfather had left everything to Marcus, including the personal effects and the $50,000. There was no mention of me at all. I felt the world tilt beneath me. That doesn't make sense, I said, my voice shaking. I saw the will. It had his signature. It was dated from last year. The secretary sighed, clearly impatient. The revised will is dated 3 months ago, miss. Your grandfather must have changed his mind. It happens frequently with elderly clients. Is there anything else? I hung up without answering. My hands were trembling so badly I had to set the phone down. 3 months ago. That was when my grandfather's dementia had gotten worse, when he had started forgetting names and repeating himself, when he had been most vulnerable. I called Richard Sterling's office back immediately and demanded to see the revised will myself. I was stonewalled at every turn. Mr. Sterling is unavailable. The will is a private family document. You are not a named beneficiary, so you have no right to review it. I called 6 times over the next week. Each time I was given the same polite but firm refusal. That's when I knew something was wrong. My grandfather had been many things, but he had never been capricious. He wouldn't have changed his will without a reason, and certainly not without telling me. We had talked just 4 months before he died, when his mind was still clear. He had held my hand and told me he was proud of me, that he had made sure I would be taken care of. Those weren't the words of a man who was about to write me out of his will. I started doing research. I spent every evening after work in the library reading about probate law, will contests, undue influence. I learned that wills could be challenged if there was evidence of coercion, or if the testator lacked mental capacity at the time of signing. I learned about forensic handwriting analysis and witness testimony. I learned that the odds of winning a will contest were slim, especially against someone with my father's resources and connections. But I also learned that I couldn't just let this go. This wasn't about the money anymore. This was about my grandfather's final wishes being respected. This was about the truth. I hired a lawyer, a young woman named Anya Sharma, who specialized in estate litigation. She was honest with me from the start. This is going to be expensive, she said, during our first meeting in her cramped downtown office. Your family has resources. They will fight dirty. Are you sure you want to do this? I looked at her, this woman who barely knew me, but was willing to help. And I thought about my grandfather. I thought about all the times my family had made me feel small, all the times they had dismissed me, ignored me, treated me like I didn't matter. I thought about the fact that they believed they could steal from me, and I would just accept it, just like I had accepted everything else my entire life. Yes, I said, I'm sure. Anya nodded. Then we need to start gathering evidence. Do you have any documentation, letters, emails, anything that shows your grandfather's intentions? I shook my head, but I think I know someone who might help. That someone was Jack Donovan. He had worked as my grandfather's head of security for over 20 years before retiring 5 years ago. I remembered him from childhood, visits to the estate, a tall man with kind eyes who always had a piece of candy in his pocket for me. After my grandfather moved to assisted living, Jack had visited him regularly, more than my own father had. I found Jack's number in an old birthday card my grandfather had given me years ago. When I called, he answered on the 3rd ring. His voice was gruff, but warm when he recognized my name. Alara Vance, I've been wondering when you'd call. You know about the will, I said. It wasn't a question. Jack was quiet for a long moment. Meet me tomorrow. There's a coffee shop on Hawthorne called The Grind. 2 o'clock. Come alone. I should have been scared. I should have questioned why he was being so secretive. But something in his voice told me he was on my side, and I desperately needed someone on my side. The next day I drove 2 hours to Portland through torrential rain. The Grind was a small place tucked between a vintage bookstore and a tattoo parlor, the kind of spot that served pour-over coffee and had mismatched furniture. Jack was already there when I arrived, sitting in the back corner with 2 cups of coffee in front of him. He had aged since I'd last seen him, his hair more gray than brown now, but his eyes were still sharp. He slid one of the coffees toward me as I sat down. Black 2 sugars, just like you used to take it. I was touched that he remembered. Thank you for meeting me. Jack leaned forward, his voice low. Your grandfather was my friend Alara, one of the best men I ever knew. What they're doing to his memory makes me sick. My throat tightened. So you know the will is fake. He nodded grimly. I know a lot of things. Your grandfather knew something was wrong 6 months before he died. His mind was slipping and he was scared. scared that Marcus would take advantage of him. So he did something smart. He made a backup plan. What kind of backup plan? Jack reached into his jacket and pulled out a key. It was old brass with a number stamped on it. This is to a safe deposit box at First National Bank downtown, box 314. Your grandfather put it in my name, but he told me it was for you if anything ever happened to him. Said you were the only one he could trust. My hands shook as I took the key. What's in it? Everything you need, Jack said. The original will for one. Handwritten, notarized, completely legal. But that's not all. Your grandfather suspected Marcus was involved in some shady business dealings. He spent the last clear months he had documenting everything he could find. Financial records, wire transfers, communications. It's all there. I stared at the key in my palm, this small piece of metal that might hold the proof I needed. Why didn't you come forward with this earlier? Why wait for me to find you? Jack's expression darkened. Because 3 days after your grandfather died, someone broke into my house. Didn't take anything, just left. Things disturbed enough to let me know they'd been there. Then I started getting phone calls. No one on the other end, just silence and then a hang-up. I'm an old man now, Alara, but I was a cop for 20 years before I worked for your grandfather. I know a threat when I see one. I've been laying low waiting to see what you would do, if you would fight or if you would roll over like they expected. And now I'm tired of hiding, he said. And I think you are too. He was right. I was exhausted from years of trying to be good enough, small enough, quiet enough. I was done. The next morning, I went to First National Bank. The building was old, one of those grand structures from the 1920s with marble floors and high ceilings. I approached the safe deposit box area and presented the key along with Jack's identification documents that he had given me as the co-signer. The bank employee, a middle-aged woman with glasses, led me to a private viewing room and brought out the box. I'll give you some privacy, she said, closing the door behind her. My hands were shaking as I opened the box. Inside was exactly what Jack had promised. A thick manila envelope with last will and testament of Jonathan Marcus Vance, written in my grandfather's shaky handwriting. Beneath it was a leather-bound notebook, the kind my grandfather had always carried, filled with his meticulous notes. I spent 2 hours in that room reading through everything. The will was clear. Everything to Marcus, yes, but with specific bequests to me, $50,000, his collection of first edition books, his pocket watch, and a letter. The letter was still sealed, my name written on the envelope in his familiar script. I opened it with trembling fingers. My dearest Alara, it began. If you are reading this, then my fears have come true, and Marcus has tried to take what I wanted you to have. I am so sorry, my girl. I should have been stronger. I should have stood up to him years ago. But I thought family was more important than anything. I was wrong. Family is only important when it's built on love and respect, not control and greed. You were always the best of us, the kindest, the most genuine. Never let them make you believe you are less than you are. I have left you the tools you need to fight back. Use them, be brave, and know that I loved you more than I was ever able to show. Your grandfather, Jonathan. I cried, then really cried for the first time since his death. Not quiet, polite tears, but big gasping sobs that shook my whole body. The bank employee knocked on the door at one point, asking if I was all right, but I couldn't answer. When I finally composed myself, I turned to the notebook. What I found there was damning. Page after page of transactions that didn't add up. Properties purchased through shell companies, money moving through offshore accounts. My grandfather had been meticulous, cross-referencing everything with public records highlighting discrepancies. On the last page, he had written a single sentence in capital letters, Marcus is laundering money through the business. I photographed every page with my phone, then carefully packed everything back into the box, except for the will, which I put in my purse. I needed to get this to Anya immediately. I was so focused on what I had found that I didn't notice the black SUV following me as I left the bank. I didn't see it until I was pulling into the parking lot of a small diner, planning to grab lunch before the long drive back to Eugene. The SUV pulled in behind me, blocking my car. My brother Leo got out. He was dressed in an expensive suit, looking every inch the heir to the Vance empire that he was. He walked toward my car with the confident stride of someone who had never been told no in his life. I locked my doors, but he knocked on the window. Come on, Alara, don't be childish. We need to talk. My heart was pounding, but I rolled down the window just an inch. What do you want, Leo? He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I want to know what you were doing at First National Bank. Dad has friends there, you know. They called him when you accessed a safe deposit box under Jack Donovan's name. I felt my blood run cold. I wasn't doing anything wrong. Jack is a family friend. Leo's smile vanished. You're trying to cause trouble, digging around in things that don't concern you. Dad is willing to be generous. He'll give you the 50 grand. Hell, he'll even throw in an extra 25. But you need to stop whatever investigation you think you're conducting and sign some paperwork saying you accept the will as it stands. And if I don't, his expression hardened, then you're making a big mistake. You think you can win against us. You're nobody, Alara. You work some dead-end analyst job making barely enough to cover rent. We have lawyers, connections, money. We will bury you. I looked at my brother, this person I had grown up with, played with as a child, and I barely recognized him. When did you become so cruel, Leo? He laughed a harsh sound. I'm not cruel. I'm practical. This family has a legacy, and I'm not going to let some bastard child destroy it because she's having a tantrum. Get away from my car, I said quietly. Or what he reached for the door handle, but I had already shifted into reverse. He jumped back as I backed up, then I sped out of the parking lot, my hands shaking on the wheel. I drove for 10 minutes before I was calm enough to pull over. I called Anya immediately and told her everything. We need to file the will contest now, she said. Today. And I think you need to consider getting a restraining order against your brother. I went straight to Anya's office. We spent the rest of the day preparing the filing. The original will, my grandfather's letter, his notebook full of evidence about Marcus's business dealings. It was everything we needed to at least raise serious questions about the revised will. But I had underestimated how quickly and how viciously my family would strike back. 2 days after we filed the will contest, I arrived at work to find my boss, Gerald, waiting at my desk. His expression was uncomfortable. Alara, we need to talk, in my office. I followed him, my stomach sinking. He closed the door and gestured for me to sit, but I remained standing. What's going on? Gerald wouldn't meet my eyes. I received a call from Marcus Vance yesterday. He's concerned about your mental health. He says you've been exhibiting signs of instability, making wild accusations, harassing family members. He suggested that perhaps the stress of your job is too much for you right now. I felt the room spin. That's not true. I'm not unstable. I'm contesting my grandfather's will because there's evidence it was forged. Gerald held up his hand. I don't want to get involved in family drama, Alara. But the truth is, your performance has been slipping. You've missed several deadlines in the past month. You've seemed distracted. Maybe taking some time off would be beneficial. Unpaid leave, of course, until you get things sorted out. Unpaid leave, I repeated. You're firing me. I'm giving you the opportunity to take a break, he corrected. Think about it over the weekend. I walked out of that office in a daze. I had missed deadlines because I had been researching probate law every night until 2 in the morning. I had been distracted because my family was trying to steal my inheritance, but Gerald didn't care about the why. Marcus Vance had made a call, and I was the collateral damage. That same afternoon, I received an email from my bank. Due to suspicious activity on your account, we have temporarily frozen your assets pending an investigation. Contact us immediately to resolve this matter. I called the bank, but I was transferred 4 times before finally being told that someone had reported potential fraud on my account, and it could take up to 30 business days to resolve. 30 days. I had $200 in my wallet and maybe enough in my checking account to cover this month's rent if the freeze was lifted in time. This was Marcus's doing. I knew it with absolute certainty. He was using his connections to cut me off from everything to make me desperate and dependent. That evening, my mother called. Her voice was syrupy sweet, the tone she used when she wanted something. Alara, darling, I heard about the unfortunate misunderstanding at your work. Why don't you come stay with us for a while? You shouldn't be alone right now. I'm fine, Mom. Are you? Because I've been hearing some concerning things. People are talking, sweetheart. They're saying you've been making wild claims about your father, that you've been acting erratically. As your mother, I'm worried. You're not my mother, I said, something inside me finally snapping. You married my father when I was 2. You've spent my entire life reminding me that I'm not really part of this family, so don't pretend to care now. There was a long silence. Then her voice turned to ice. You ungrateful little brat. After everything we've given you, we could have left you with nothing but. Marcus was generous enough to raise you as his own. And this is how you repay him, by dragging our family name through the mud. He stole from me, I said. He forged grandfather's will. Isabel laughed a cruel sound. Your grandfather was senile, Alara. He didn't know what he was doing half the time. Marcus was simply ensuring that the family legacy stayed where it belonged. With family, real family. She hung up. I stood there in my tiny apartment, the phone still pressed to my ear, and felt more alone than I ever had in my life. But I refused to give up. Over the next 2 weeks, Anya and I built our case. We tracked down the notary who had supposedly witnessed my grandfather's revised will. She remembered signing it, she said, but she also admitted that my grandfather had seemed confused and kept asking where Alara was. That alone was enough to question his mental capacity. We hired a forensic handwriting analyst who compared the signature on the revised will to samples of my grandfather's writing from around the same time period. Her conclusion was stark. The signature showed signs of being traced or forged. The pressure points were wrong, the flow was too hesitant. Jack provided a sworn statement about my grandfather's lucidity and his explicit wishes regarding the will. He also detailed the suspicious break-in at his home and the threatening phone calls. We had enough to force the court to take us seriously. A hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks from the date of filing, but my family wasn't done trying to intimidate me. I started noticing the same black SUV parked outside my apartment at odd hours. My phone began ringing at all hours of the night, no one on the other end. My tires were slashed twice in 1 week. Then came the break-in. I had been working late at a coffee shop using their Wi-Fi since I couldn't afford my own internet anymore. I came home around 10 at night to find my apartment door slightly ajar. I knew immediately that something was wrong. I should have called the police right then, but I was so tired of feeling helpless. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The devastation was complete. Every drawer had been pulled out and dumped. My mattress was slashed open, stuffing pulled out. My laptop was smashed. My clothes were torn. Books were ripped apart. It was destruction for the sake of destruction, meant to send a message. And there on the bathroom mirror, written in what I prayed was lipstick but looked disturbingly like blood, were 3 words: stop or die. I stumbled backward, my legs giving out. I sat on the floor of my destroyed apartment and finally called the police. 2 officers arrived 30 minutes later. They took a report, photographed the scene, asked the standard questions. Did I have any enemies? Had I been threatened? I told them about the will contest, about my family's harassment, about everything. The older officer looked sympathetic but doubtful. We'll file a report, ma'am, but without evidence of who did this, there's not much we can do. You might want to consider staying somewhere else for a few days. After they left, I called Jack. He arrived an hour later with a duffel bag and a grim expression. You're staying at my place tonight. No arguments. I was too exhausted to argue. We packed what little wasn't destroyed into my car and drove to Jack's small house on the outskirts of Portland. That night, lying in Jack's guest room, I realized I had a choice to make. I could drop the will contest, take whatever crumbs Marcus offered, and try to rebuild my life. Or I could fight back with everything I had, knowing that my family would stop at nothing to silence me. I thought about my grandfather, about his letter, about his words. Be brave. I decided to be brave. The next morning, I met with Anya and told her I wanted to expand our case. It's not just about the will anymore. We need to expose everything. The money laundering, the threats, all of it. Anya looked worried. Alara, that makes this much more dangerous. If your father is really involved in money laundering, he has a lot to lose. He could become desperate. Good, I said. Let him be desperate. I'm tired of being the only one who's scared. We spent the next month building an airtight case. Jack connected us with David Chen, the lawyer who had originally handled my grandfather's estate planning before mysteriously retiring 5 years ago. It took some convincing, but David finally agreed to meet with us. We met at a small diner 3 hours outside of Portland. David was a nervous man in his 60s, constantly looking over his shoulder. He had aged badly, his face lined with stress and fear. After your grandfather's first will was executed, Marcus came to see me. David said, his voice shaking. He wanted me to prepare a new will, leaving everything to him, with no bequest to you or anyone else. I refused. Your grandfather had been very clear about his wishes, and I wasn't going to go against them. What happened then? Anya asked gently. Marcus threatened me, David said. He told me he knew about some mistakes I'd made early in my career, things that could get me disbarred if they came to light. He said he had the evidence and he would use it unless I cooperated. When I still refused, he threatened my family, my grandchildren. He knew their names, their schools, everything. David pulled out an envelope from his jacket. But I'm not an idiot. I recorded our conversation, all of it. I've kept this for 5 years, too scared to do anything with it, but also unable to destroy it. If you're really going to take him on, you'll need this. Inside the envelope was a flash drive. Anya and I listened to the recording that night. Marcus's voice was clear and unmistakable, alternating between charm and menace. I'm asking you as a friend, David. You know how families can be. My father was getting confused. This will is what he really wanted, he just didn't realize it. And if David resisted, it would be a shame if your grandson had an accident on his way to soccer practice. Kids that age, they don't pay attention when they cross the street. It was damning. Not just evidence of the forged will, but of witness intimidation of threats. Combined with my grandfather's notebook and the forensic analysis, we had a case that could not only invalidate the will, but potentially lead to criminal charges against Marcus. But we needed one more thing. We needed Marcus to incriminate himself on the record. I came up with a plan. It was risky, and it required me to do the one thing I had been trying to avoid: confront my family directly. I called Marcus and told him I wanted to negotiate. I was tired of fighting, I said. I just wanted to settle this and move on with my life. Could we meet at the family estate to discuss terms? I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. Finally, you're being sensible. Come tomorrow evening. Just family. We'll work this out. The next evening, I drove to the Vance estate, the sprawling mansion where I had spent so much of my miserable childhood. Jack was parked down the street, monitoring everything. I had a recording device hidden in my jacket pocket, a tiny thing that Anya had acquired through a private investigator. Marcus, Isabel, and Leo were waiting for me in the library, the same room where we used to have awkward family dinners. They sat together on one side of the large oak table, a united front. I sat alone on the other side. Isabel spoke first, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Alara, darling, I'm so glad you've come to your senses. This whole ordeal has been so stressful for everyone. I kept my face neutral. I just want this to be over. Marcus smiled. As do we. Here's what we're prepared to offer. $75,000 paid out over 5 years. In exchange, you'll sign a settlement agreement accepting the revised will and agreeing not to pursue any further legal action or make any public statements about family matters. $75,000 over 5 years. It was insulting, a tiny fraction of what I was actually owed. But I nodded slowly. What about the other issues? The discrepancies in grandfather's business records. Marcus's smile tightened. What discrepancies? I pulled out a copy of one page from my grandfather's notebook, one that showed a particularly damning transaction. These. The shell companies, the offshore transfers. Grandfather documented everything before he died. The room went very still. Leo leaned forward, his face flushed. Where did you get that? Grandfather left it for me, along with the real will. He knew what you were doing, Dad. He knew you were using the company to launder money, and he was going to expose you. That's why you had to forge a new will, isn't it? So you could control everything and bury the evidence. Marcus's calm facade finally cracked. His face went red, a vein pulsing at his temple. You have no idea what you're talking about. Your grandfather was a senile old man who didn't understand modern business. He understood corruption, I shot back. He understood that you were destroying everything he built. Leo stood up abruptly. You little bitch. We should have dealt with you a long time ago. Dealt with me, I asked. You mean like when you had someone break into my apartment, when you slashed my tires, when you left that message on my mirror? Leo's face went pale, realizing he had given something away, but it was too late to take it back. Marcus stood as well, his voice cold and controlled now. You need to understand something, Alara. This family has a legacy, a reputation. Your grandfather built something remarkable, and I've expanded it beyond his wildest dreams. I won't let anyone destroy that, especially not some ungrateful child who was never really one of us to begin with. Because I'm not your biological daughter, I asked quietly. Because you're weak, Marcus said bluntly. You always have been. Too soft, too emotional, too naive. You don't have what it takes to run an empire. Your grandfather went soft in his old age, letting his emotions cloud his judgment. I did what was necessary to protect what we built. The lawyer who refused to cooperate your grandfather's sentimental wishes, even you, all of it had to be managed. Isabel finally spoke up, her voice sharp. Marcus, that's enough. But Marcus was on a roll now, years of contempt finally pouring out. No, she needs to hear this. We gave you everything, Alara. A home, an education, a chance to be part of something bigger than yourself. And how do you repay us? By trying to tear it all down? By running to lawyers and making accusations? By being so ungrateful that you can't even accept a generous settlement? Generous, I said, my voice shaking. You stole my inheritance. You forged a will. You intimidated witnesses. You ruined my career. You destroyed my home. And you call $75,000 generous. It's more than you deserve, Leo snarled. We should have let you rot. I stood up then, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. You're right about one thing. I'm not like you. I'm not cruel. I'm not corrupt. And I'm not going to let you get away with this. Marcus laughed a harsh sound. And how exactly are you going to stop us? You have nothing, no job, no money, no support. Who's going to believe you over me? I smiled then for the first time all evening. Everyone who listens to the recording I've been making of this entire conversation. And everyone who sees the evidence we're presenting in court next week. The original will, grandfather's documentation of your money laundering, the forensic analysis of the forged signature, and David Chen's testimony about how you threatened him and his family to get what you wanted. The color drained from Marcus's face. You're bluffing. I pulled the small recording device from my pocket and held it up. Am I? For a moment, I thought Marcus might actually have a heart attack. His face went from red to purple, his hands clenching into fists. Leo moved toward me, but I stepped back quickly, holding up my phone. Jack Donovan is right outside. If I don't walk out of here in the next 2 minutes, he's calling the police and releasing everything to the media. You can't do this, Isabel said, her voice trembling. Think about what this will do to the family name. You should have thought about that before you decided to steal from me, I said. Before you tried to destroy me to cover up your crimes. I walked toward the door, but Leo blocked my path. Get out of my way, I said quietly. Or what, he sneered. Or I'll add assault to the list of charges, I said. Move, Leo. He stood there for another few seconds, then Marcus called out, let her go. Leo stepped aside, his face twisted with rage. This isn't over, he hissed as I passed. You're right, I said. It's not. I'll see you all in court. I walked out of that house, my legs shaking so badly I could barely make it to my car. Jack was there in seconds, helping me into his vehicle. You did it, he said, his voice full of pride. You really did it. I started crying then, all the fear and adrenaline finally releasing. We drove away from the Vance estate, and I never looked back. The court hearing 3 weeks later was everything I had hoped for, and more. The courtroom was packed. My father had hired a team of lawyers, 3 of them in expensive suits, sitting at the defense table. Anya sat alone at our table, but she looked confident and prepared. I sat behind her in the gallery, my hands folded in my lap, trying to look calm, even though my heart was racing. Marcus, Isabel, and Leo sat on the opposite side of the courtroom. Isabel was dressed impeccably in a cream-colored suit, her makeup perfect, playing the role of the dignified matriarch. Marcus wore his power like a suit of armor, his expression one of barely concealed contempt. Leo kept glancing at me with undisguised hatred. The judge, a woman in her 60s named Margaret Holloway, called the court to order. She had a reputation for being no-nonsense and fair, which was exactly what I needed. Marcus's lead attorney, a silver-haired man named Robert Hutchinson, presented their case first. It was slick and well-rehearsed. He painted a picture of a loving family torn apart by a granddaughter's greed. He talked about my grandfather's declining mental state, about how confused he had become in his final months. He produced medical records showing Jonathan's dementia diagnosis. He brought up my recent job loss and financial troubles, suggesting I was desperate and had manufactured this entire controversy. The revised will was perfectly legal, Hutchinson argued. Properly executed, properly witnessed. Mr. Vance had simply realized in his final months that leaving a substantial bequest to Miss Alara would be unwise given her instability. He had wanted to ensure the family business remained intact and in capable hands. It was a compelling narrative, and I could see some people in the gallery nodding along. These were Marcus's friends, his business associates, people who had known him for decades. They wanted to believe him. Then it was Anya's turn. She stood up slowly, gathering her papers. Your Honor, she began, her voice clear and steady. What we have here is not a family disagreement over an inheritance. What we have is a systematic campaign of fraud, intimidation, and criminal activity designed to deprive my client of her rightful inheritance and to conceal ongoing illegal business practices. Hutchinson objected immediately. Inflammatory and unsubstantiated accusations, Your Honor. Judge Holloway looked at Anya. Counselor, I hope you have evidence to back up these claims. I do, Your Honor, Anya said. Substantial evidence. She began methodically laying out our case. First, she presented the original will, the one found in the safe deposit box. She had it examined by multiple handwriting experts, all of whom confirmed it was genuine. She showed the court my grandfather's letter to me, dated and notarized, expressing his explicit wishes. Then she called David Chen to the stand. David was nervous, his hands shaking as he was sworn in, but his testimony was devastating. He described in detail how Marcus had come to his office demanding he prepare a new will. He recounted the threats, the intimidation, the explicit warnings about his grandchildren's safety. And then Anya played the recording. Marcus's voice filled the courtroom, alternating between fake friendliness and naked menace. It would be a shame if your grandson had an accident on his way to soccer practice. Kids that age, they don't pay attention when they cross the street. The courtroom erupted. Hutchinson was on his feet shouting objections. Judge Holloway had to bang her gavel 3 times to restore order. But the damage was done. Everyone had heard Marcus Vance threaten a witness and his family. Anya wasn't finished. She brought in the forensic handwriting analyst, who explained in technical detail why the signature on the revised will was likely forged. She showed the court the pressure analysis, the comparison of letter formations, the timing inconsistencies. It was dry testimony, but it was damning. Then Jack took the stand. He described my grandfather's lucidity in his final months, the conversations they had about his wishes for the estate. He testified about the break-in at his home after Jonathan's death, about the threatening phone calls. He explained how Jonathan had given him the safe deposit box key with explicit instructions that it was meant for me. Finally, Anya turned to the issue of my grandfather's notebook. She had the documentation verified by a forensic accountant who testified that the transactions described showed clear patterns of money laundering. Properties purchased through shell companies at inflated prices, money moved through offshore accounts, fraudulent invoicing. It was all there, meticulously documented by a man who had built his empire on honesty and couldn't stand to see it corrupted. Your Honor. Anya said this case is about more than just a will. It's about a pattern of criminal behavior that Mr. Marcus Vance has engaged in for years. When his father discovered what he was doing and threatened to expose him, Marcus took action. He intimidated witnesses, forged documents, and when his daughter dared to question him, he destroyed her life. He had her fired from her job, her bank accounts frozen, her home vandalized. And when that wasn't enough, he had someone break into her apartment and leave a death threat. Hutchinson tried to fight back, but his objections were weak. How could he defend against recordings, against forensic evidence, against multiple witnesses? Then Anya played her final card. She played the recording from the family meeting at the Vance estate. The courtroom listened in stunned silence as Marcus's voice once again filled the space. Your grandfather was a senile old man who didn't understand modern business. I did what was necessary to protect what we built. The lawyer who refused to cooperate your grandfather's sentimental wishes, even you, all of it had to be managed. When Leo's voice came through, threatening me, admitting to the break-in, gasps echoed through the courtroom. Isabel's face went white. Marcus sat stone-faced, but I could see his hands trembling. By the time the recording finished, Judge Holloway's expression was one of barely concealed disgust. She called a brief recess, and when court reconvened 30 minutes later, she didn't waste time. I've been on the bench for 23 years, she began, and I have never seen such a clear-cut case of fraud and intimidation. The evidence presented by Miss Vance's counsel is overwhelming and frankly disturbing. The revised will presented by the Vance family is clearly fraudulent, and I am declaring it null and void. The original will, as executed by Jonathan Marcus Vance and found in the safe deposit box, is hereby recognized as his true last testament. She turned to look directly at Marcus. Furthermore, Mr. Vance, I am ordering the immediate suspension of all your authority over the family business, pending a full criminal investigation into the money laundering allegations. The evidence presented here today suggests serious financial crimes that extend far beyond the scope of this probate case. Judge Holloway looked at me, then her expression softening slightly. Miss Vance, I am sorry for what you have endured. Your grandfather clearly recognized your character and integrity. I am declaring you the sole legitimate heir to his estate as per his original wishes. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that seemed to echo through the courtroom like a gunshot. For a moment, no one moved. Then chaos erupted. Isabel collapsed in her seat, actually fainting this time. Not the theatrical performance she had tried at family events. Leo was on his feet, screaming obscenities at me until court security moved in. Marcus just sat there staring straight ahead, as if he couldn't quite process what had just happened. 2 police officers entered the courtroom. Marcus Vance, one of them said, "We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of fraud, witness intimidation, and conspiracy." I watched as they handcuffed my father, reading him his rights. He looked at me once as they led him away, and I saw something in his eyes I had never seen before. Fear. Leo was arrested moments later. The threats and admissions on the recording enough for the district attorney to charge him with assault, intimidation, and being an accessory to his father's crimes. Isabel recovered consciousness to find herself alone, her husband and son both in handcuffs. The friends and associates who had filled the courtroom were already slipping away, distancing themselves from the scandal as quickly as possible. Anya put her hand on my shoulder. "You did it," she said quietly. "You actually did it." I nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. I had won. But it didn't feel triumphant in that moment. It felt like grief. Grief for the family I had always wanted but never had. Grief for my grandfather who had tried to do the right thing and died before he could see justice served. Grief for the little girl I had been, who had spent so many years trying to earn love from people who were incapable of giving it. But underneath the grief was something else, something stronger, relief, freedom, and the first stirrings of hope. The aftermath moved quickly. Marcus was denied bail, considered a flight risk, given his offshore accounts and connections. He was charged with multiple counts of money laundering, fraud, witness intimidation, and forgery. Leo faced charges of assault, criminal threatening, and conspiracy. The district attorney was pushing for significant prison time for both of them. Isabel was questioned as a potential accessory, but ultimately not charged. The prosecutors couldn't prove she had direct knowledge of Marcus's crimes, though she had certainly benefited from them. But the court of public opinion was far less forgiving. The society matron who had spent decades building her reputation as Portland's queen of charity and culture was now persona non grata. The organizations she had chaired quietly asked her to step down. Her friends stopped returning her calls. The life she had built on appearances and status crumbled in a matter of weeks. I heard through Jack that she had moved to a small apartment in Seattle, living off the remnants of her personal savings. The woman who had once controlled millions was now clipping coupons. Part of me felt sorry for her, but mostly I felt nothing. She had made her choices. As for me, I suddenly found myself in control of a massive estate. Properties, investments, the entire Vance real estate empire. It was overwhelming and more than a little terrifying. I was 28 years old and responsible for assets worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The first thing I did was hire a team of forensic accountants to go through everything with a fine-toothed comb. They found more illegal activity than even my grandfather had documented. Marcus had been running schemes for over a decade, using the legitimate business as a front for laundering money from various sources. It took 6 months to untangle it all and work with federal investigators to identify all the illegal activity. In the end, I sold off the tainted parts of the business, the properties that had been purchased with dirty money, the shell companies that existed only on paper. I cooperated fully with law enforcement, turning over every piece of evidence we found. Some people thought I was crazy, that I should just keep quiet and enjoy the money, but I couldn't. That wasn't who I was, and it wasn't what my grandfather would have wanted. With the proceeds from the legitimate parts of the estate, I did something my grandfather would have been proud of. I established the Jonathan Vance Foundation for Legal Aid, a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing free legal services to people who were being bullied, intimidated, or cheated by powerful individuals and corporations. People like David Chen, whose families were threatened for doing the right thing. People like me who had been systematically dismantled by those who should have protected them. Jack Donovan became the foundation's director of security. Anya Sharma became our chief legal counsel. We hired a team of aggressive principled attorneys who weren't afraid to take on the big players. In the first year, we took on 42 cases. We helped a group of tenants sue a slumlord who had threatened them when they tried to organize. We represented a whistleblower who had been blacklisted from her industry for exposing fraud. We got justice for a small business owner whose competitor had tried to destroy him through frivolous lawsuits. We won 38 of those cases. 9 months after the trial, I stood in front of a crowd at the foundation's official launch event. It was held in a renovated community center, in a working-class neighborhood, not in some fancy hotel ballroom. The people in attendance were clients we had helped, volunteers, other nonprofit leaders, and members of the press. I had been terrified to give the speech, but as I stood at that podium looking out at faces of people who understood what it meant to fight against overwhelming odds, I felt calm. My grandfather used to tell me that wealth is a responsibility, not a privilege, I began. He believed that those who have resources have an obligation to use them to make the world more just. For too long, his legacy was corrupted by people who saw money only as a source of power and control. Today, we reclaim that legacy and dedicate it to its true purpose, justice for everyone, not just those who can afford it. The applause was thunderous. After the speech, person after person came up to thank me, to share their stories, to tell me what the foundation's help had meant to them. A single mother who had won custody of her children after her ex-husband tried to use his wealth to take them away. An elderly couple who had kept their home after we stopped a fraudulent foreclosure. A young man who had successfully sued his employer for discrimination. These were the victories that mattered. Not millions in a bank account or properties on paper, but real lives changed for the better. Later that evening, as the event wound down, Jack found me standing alone on the balcony, overlooking the city. "Beautiful night," he said, coming to stand beside me. "It is," I agreed. "Your grandfather would be proud, you know. Not just of what you've built, but of who you've become." I felt tears prick at my eyes. I hope so. I wish he could see this. Jack was quiet for a moment. I think he knew. That last conversation we had before his mind really started to go, he told me that you were the only one who understood what really mattered. He said Marcus had never learned that success measured in money is meaningless if it's built on the suffering of others. But you, he said you had his heart. The heart of someone who builds things to last, not just to profit. We stood there in comfortable silence, watching the lights of Portland twinkle in the darkness. As for Marcus and Leo, justice was served in the most literal sense. Marcus was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison for money laundering, fraud, and witness tampering. Leo got 8 years for his role as an accomplice and for the assault charges. They would both be old men by the time they got out, their reputations destroyed, their empire dismantled. I didn't attend their sentencing. I had said everything I needed to say in court. Moving forward meant exactly that. Moving forward, not dwelling on the past or the people who had tried to destroy me. I never spoke to my mother again. She tried to reach out a few times in the months after the trial letters that started with apologies, but always ended with requests for money. I sent them back unopened. Some bridges once burned should stay burned. But I wasn't alone. I had Jack, who had become like the grandfather I had lost. I had Anya, who had become not just my lawyer, but a genuine friend. I had David Chen, who now volunteered with the foundation, helping other attorneys understand the psychological toll of witness intimidation. I had built a new family, one based on mutual respect and shared values rather than blood and obligation. 2 years after that first court victory, I was invited to speak at a legal conference about fighting back against powerful adversaries. As I stood on that stage, I thought about the terrified woman who had found a death threat on her mirror, who had lost everything and had been on the verge of giving up. The system is designed to favor the powerful, I told the audience. They have more lawyers, more money, more connections. They bank on the fact that most people will give up rather than face the stress and cost of a legal battle. But here's what they don't count on: the truth is powerful too. And when you combine truth with courage and a refusal to back down, you can win. You can beat them. I shared my story, holding nothing back. The forged will, the threats, the isolation, the fear, but also the small victories along the way. Finding Jack, getting the evidence, standing up in that final confrontation at the estate, watching justice be served. When I finished, the applause was long and loud, but what moved me most were the people who came up afterward. So many of them had their own stories of being bullied by family members, betrayed by people they trusted, fighting against systems designed to protect the wealthy and powerful. They thanked me for speaking out, for showing that it was possible to fight back and win. One woman, probably in her 60s, took both my hands in hers. Her eyes were wet with tears. "My daughter is going through something similar with her ex-husband," she said. "He's rich and connected, and he's trying to take her kids away. She's been so scared, ready to give up. I'm going to tell her about you. I'm going to tell her that if you could do it, she can too." That's when I really understood the value of what I had built. It wasn't just about the foundation or the cases we won. It was about being a voice for people who had been silenced, a testament to the fact that you don't have to accept abuse just because it comes from someone who is supposed to love you. Now, 3 years after that terrible night when I found the death threat on my mirror, I wake up every morning in a modest apartment, not a mansion. I drive a reliable used car, not a luxury vehicle. I work long hours at the foundation, often for causes that will never make us money. But I'm happier than I ever was growing up in that big house, trying to earn the approval of people who were incapable of giving it. My grandfather's steel, the steel he used to build his empire, wasn't about being hard or cruel or ruthless. It was about having a backbone, standing up for what's right, refusing to bend when pressure is applied. It was about being strong enough to help others, not to dominate them. That's the legacy I carry now. That's the steel I'm made of. And every day I try to help someone else find their own steel, their own courage to stand up and fight back. So let me ask you something. Have you ever felt powerless against someone who was supposed to care about you? Have you ever been betrayed by family or hurt by someone you trusted? Have you ever wanted to fight back but didn't think you could win? I'm here to tell you that you can. It won't be easy. You'll be scared. You'll doubt yourself. People will tell you to give up, to accept your lot, to be grateful for whatever scraps you're given. But you don't have to accept that. You deserve respect. You deserve honesty. You deserve to be treated like a human being, not a pawn or a problem to be managed. And if the people in your life can't see that, then maybe it's time to build a new life with people who do. If this story resonated with you, if you've been through something similar, or if you know someone who needs to hear this, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Share your own story in the comments below. Let's build a community of people who refuse to be victims, who fight back against injustice, and who support each other in the journey toward freedom and healing. Remember, having a backbone isn't about being cruel. It's about refusing to accept cruelty. That's the difference between strength and meanness. And that's the legacy worth building.